thank you everybody for joining us so early and for sticking through the technical difficulties. I was imagining that we would all be sort of like, I guess Neil and I would be kind of grumbling because it's a little early for us.
All right.
Later for you
a
folks.
tiny bit.
But I thought, let's start off today's episode with a little bit of humor, huh? I got a couple of jokes for us to sort of warm us up here. So, what do you call a microphone with a great sense of humor?
I don't know. What do you call a microphone with a great sense of humor?
A stand-up mic.
Stand-up mic.
I was thinking it could have been a ribbing mic, but
A ribbing.
me being funny.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I like that. Okay, how many recording engineers does it take to change a light bulb?
And now if this were producers, I'd know the answer.
No.
Because if we were producers, the answer is, I don't know, what do you think? Engineers, I'm interested to know the recording engineer one, though. Go right ahead.
So the answer is none. They'll just mic it up and sample the sound of the old one burning out.
Fix it in the mix, yeah.
Let's fix it in the mix. There you go. And last one, how many sound engineers does it take to mic up a band?
I don't know. How many?
I don't know.
Just one, but it'll take them at least 20 minutes to decide on the perfect placement for the snare mic.
Yeah.
Bam! Let's get the show started.
Hello, and welcome to Sound Discussion. Each episode, we discuss a music topic which we have all had first-hand experience with. These will be anything from getting started, recording, playing live, mixing, mastering, and everything in between. Most episodes will have a special guest to bring their professional experience to the discussion. Let's get started.
This month's guest is a highly respected figure in the music industry, known for his expertise and educational contributions to audio recording and production. With a career spanning several decades, he has worked as a recording engineer, producer, and most recently, an author. He is probably best known for his books, Recording Secrets for the Small Studio and Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio, which has become a go-to resource for both aspiring and professional audio engineers. His experience writing the Mix Rescue series for Sound on Sound magazine further solidifies his reputation as a leading authority in the field, where he shares in-depth insights and practical advice on mixing, mastering, and recording techniques. In addition to his writing, he is the founder of themixreview.org and cambridgemt.com, the latter being an excellent website that provides multi-track downloads for educational purposes, allowing aspiring engineers to practice mixing and mastering on real-world projects. Through his work on Cambridge MT, Sound on Sound, his authored books, and his Patreon podcast, he continues to inspire and educate the next generation of audio professionals. His practical approach to mixing and production techniques has earned him a reputation as a trusted mentor and advisor to musicians and producers worldwide. There is no doubt that his ongoing contributions will continue to make a lasting impact on the art and science of music production. And just a small aside, I will say that your books were my audio education. These were the first two books that I bought when I was jumping in, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do and how I was going to do it. And I knew you from
I'm honored.
From Sound on Sound, and I bought these books, and these were my textbooks. So
wonderful.
It is my honor, really, to have with us today Mr. Mike Sr.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. It's so great to have you here.
It's when you start saying, in a career spanning decades, that's when I kind of go, crumbs. Has it really been that long? But it really has. That's the distressing thing about it. You kind of get up every morning and do the same old things every day and every week and every month, and then you look around the next moment, it's like 20 years have passed, and you go, wow, all that stuff I did in that 20 years. Yeah, it piles up.
It's amazing how A, how quickly time goes, but B, how much, you have been a part of a lot of things, right? Aside from your, where you started out, your studio work, and we'll get into that here in a moment, but, you're kind of everywhere, right? We see you on Sound, you started there as an editor, then you went into the freelance type stuff, and you were writing. You started a couple of columns and you've kept doing them, and then your Cambridge MT website, which, in all of my conversations with people, and people ask, where can I practice? Where can I get Multitracks, and I always send them to your website because
Oh, that's kind of you. Thank you.
it's an excellent resource, right? And then your Patreon podcast, which, full disclosure, I am a Patreon supporter of your channel and have been for
Very much appreciated.
a number of years. And it again has proven to be a very worthwhile contribution. I've gotten a lot out of it, and I always enjoy the content you put out there. So enough about me. I'm going to shut up now. Mike, tell us a little bit about who you are for those who might not know. How'd you get started, and sort of how it all came about?
God, it's a long and circuitous story. In fact, if you want to get the full details, probably listen to Working Class Audio Podcast, because
There we go.
we went deep into the past. We went deep into the past there.
Most podcasts you've been on, you've done a deep dive into your history.
Yeah.
So let's have
it's a bit torturous, but to give it the kind of the Cliff Notes thing, basically I'm classically trained, and then got into studio work when I was at university doing a music degree. Then worked a bit in studios. Moved back to Cambridge to be with the woman who has since become my wife. And while I was there, that's where Sound on Sound magazine is based, and that's where I kind of sidestepped then into a lot of writing work and training work and teaching work, and then obviously freelance engineering, and that expanded into the books and into doing tutorial video content, and the site, and really kind of grew up in a sense around the Multitrack library, which when I first moved to Cambridge, I did a bit of substitute teaching and was amazed that at that time, which was like 2006, something like that, that a Multitrack library didn't already exist on the net. I thought, isn't that what the net's for? I'm amazed someone hasn't done it. And just happened to be in the position because I'd done a few mixed rescues that I was able to set it up. And that then kind of kick-started the website, and it was popular. People found it useful, as, you know, I found it useful when I was doing my teaching stuff. And then that kind of expanded from there. So yeah, everything grew out of that slightly serendipitous arrival at Sound on Sound, and then building resources from there.
Amazing. I mean, I agree with you. I think when I first started getting into music, one of the things that you can never understand is, well, why doesn't anything I record sound like the stuff I'm hearing on the radio? And the answer to that is because you haven't recorded it very well. That is the honest answer. But the reason you don't know that you haven't recorded it very well is because I was like, well, this is what everyone starts with. And unless you can get your hands on some multitracks to go, oh no, a properly recorded multitrack sounds like this, you have no way of knowing that your stuff is actually not very good. And it's not that it's a bad song or you're a bad songwriter. It's that your tracks are bad to start with.
100%. And in fact, it's a kind of chicken and the egg thing. It's like, how are you supposed to practice mixing unless you've got some stuff that's recorded? But I actually think it's the other way round is more important. It's like, how are you supposed to learn how to record if you don't know what's useful when you mix it? And I think that's where the Multitrack library really is important for me, because I think people should learn how to mix before they learn how to record. Because it's all the mixing that I've done that more than anything probably has taught me how to record. Because I've found myself swearing blind about some ridiculous recording someone's done, and like, how the hell am I going to get a sound out of this? And then it makes me go, what? When I next do a recording, I'm not going to put myself in this position. Right. And yeah.
You learn
so
what not to do.
It informs your recording when you know how to mix.
Yeah.
A huge deal.
That's really interesting.
We've talked about that before on this podcast of, like, you know, mixing or recording with the mix in mind, just making sure that you've got that in mind. And yeah, if you mix before, like if you've been learning to mix, then, you know, if you got that in mind, recording, that just makes your life so much easier.
And I mean, it's a fair question as well. People often ask, well, how should it sound? Because you only ever hear the mixed result as a consumer. So when you're learning to record, the concept of how should it sound, you don't really know, because you don't know how that goes through the funnel of the mix. In fact, a really good example is electric guitars. The number of people who, when they first are recording their band, they drive all their electric guitars too hard, because all the records they hear are these multi-layered guitar confections, and so they think they've got to get all of that out of their single guitar. So then they record it that way and then wonder why they can't get that sound that they hear on the records. It's because, well, that's not what they recorded. So yeah, it definitely, knowing how to mix is the thing that tells you how to record, I think.
I think that's the other thing, isn't it? Sorry, now. I was going to say, that's the other thing with if you get your hands on the multi-tracks, is you suddenly realise how many tracks go into making, well, in your example, that guitar sound. It's not they plug their guitar in, set all the dials to 11, and just play, it might be 9 different guitar tracks from 5 different amps with 3 different guitars. And you don't know that as a consumer. You just go, I just want that big, I don't know, Metallica guitar sound. You have no idea of the actual concepts that go behind it until you get your hands on the multitracks, when you're then like, oh, wait a minute. All of these tracks sound really, they're playing the same thing, but they sound different. And that's, I think, when I found that those multi-track sites and you were able to sort of take it apart and understand how it goes together, it helps you, as you say, it helps you with recording, helps you with producing, because most of the people who listen to our podcast, apart from my mum, are at home, probably in their own studio, writing their own music. And it helps them with producing, it helps them with recording, just to get to understand how those tracks all go together.
And I think there's definitely a sense as well that when people listen to a production, unless they know how the thing's been put together, they tend to lump things together that are often separate elements. Like you say, they listen to the guitar sound and think that's a guitar, when it may be 6 layers of guitar, and it may be that guitar part in time also is a guitar arrangement rather than a guitar part. In fact, that's one of the biggest kind of arrangement lessons that I try and teach people about guitars, is that a guitar part isn't a part, it's an arrangement. When you go up to that, you go to the chugging bit before you get into the chorus, probably you're going to want to have a slightly different guitar sound there, or the different layers or something, and then when it hits the chorus you want something else to come in, and then when it goes to the solo, then it's going to be something different. And it's not just about, it's all in the guitars. There's an arrangement involved in it, but you don't hear it, you just think it's a guitar when you're a listener, but to the producer, it's a guitar arrangement.
Yeah, that is really important, because it's not. There's this sort of like cloak, right? This curtain when you're listening to a song and you don't know what went into it. All you're hearing is the final product. But there's a really great visual example. I'm sure there's plenty, but one that sticks out to me is the documentary Back and Forth with the Foo Fighters. They were recording that record in their home with Butch Vig. And there's a number of scenes, but one sticks out in my mind of literally this wall of speakers that Dave Grohl was playing into. And it was probably 6 or 7 speakers and amps all being mic'd up and recorded. And that is the sound, right? It's a blend of like 6 or 7 different speakers. Maybe they cut one out. I don't know. But that's the sound of at least one of their songs that they show in the documentary. And I think that's pretty typical, actually, right? Like you're not just getting one sound. You're taking layers and patchworks of different sounds and putting them together, and that's the final product.
Well, the other thing to realize with those kinds of big productions is that if you're going to do a record and make it enjoyable for the musicians and quick for the musicians, one of the standard techniques to make that possible is basically to set up everything that anyone's ever going to need all at once. And then all you need to do at any point is just select which channels you use. So often things, when you look at a session, look much more complicated than actually what ends up on the record, because they've just got everything set up so that at any moment someone can go, you know what would banjo sound like on this? And the banjo's already there, and it's already mic'd up, and they've already sound checked it, and the headphones are already set up. And no one needs to think about it. And yeah, this is, recording is as much a kind of a psychological thing as it is a technical thing. And so a lot of the complexity you see in big sessions isn't actually complexity. It's just this ability to move quickly and change. It's flexibility rather than complexity.
So that kind of brings me into one of the topics I wanted to discuss. And, today's topic is going to be about, microphone technique.
And I've already managed to sidetrack you.
And we've already managed to.
Story of my life, that is.
It's all relevant. It's all relevant. So the one thing, I was thinking about it this morning. I wrote down a couple of ideas. I'd like to touch upon these things, but maybe we won't. Mic techniques and miking single sources, more mics, less mics, phase alignment, all that jazz. But the one thing that hit me this morning that I'm like, we have to talk about this is, are microphones still relevant in the digital age with the amp modeling that we have with microphone emulation built in, and virtual instruments with mic emulation built in, and, modeling microphones? I've got one above my head that I use, which gives me a huge locker of microphones to choose from when I'm recording or after I've recorded. And it's saved my take a number of times, right? So in this day and age of everything digital, everything in the box, are microphones still relevant?
I think they're one of the only relevant things, in fact. I'd flip it round. The great thing about all the digital stuff is that it'll deal with signals. It'll deal with stuff once it's in the digital domain. But I think the thing that makes probably the biggest difference to any production, my kind of rule of thumb is that the things that you need to, and the things certainly I would say spend money on, because you can do almost everything else now, honestly, for free in a computer in the digital domain. The thing I'd spend money on is anything that touches the air vibrations. So no, you're talking your speakers, you're talking your acoustic treatment, both when you're recording and you're mixing. You're talking about your microphones, your instruments, the players, all that. It's all that stuff that the digital technology is still not very good at dealing with, whatever manufacturers may tell you.
That's kind of what I was hoping you'd say.
Yeah. I mean, there are still definite ways in which expensive microphones are going to make your life a lot easier than cheaper microphones. You still can't take a 57 and expect that it's going to operate like a really nice Neumann microphone or something. And it's not. And the thing is that I think a lot of people try and build this myth of, a cheap microphone's just as good as an expensive one, based on doing vocal shootouts. And that's a really bad test for it, because actually vocal recording, the actual technical bit of vocal recording, is one of the simplest recording tasks. In fact, in the recording secrets book, that's one of the tasks I take on first, because it is comparatively simple. You tend to record in a very dead environment. Acoustics don't really matter. It's pretty much, it's recorded close up. The thing's not moving around. You're not recording in an ensemble. It might be moving around a bit. That's one of the complications. But and because each voice is different and so complicated, it's very common when you do a mic shootout that you'll find that microphones that are cheaper, and kind of the equivalent, the meaning of that is that they're less general purpose, they're less neutral, they're less faithful, they enhance things in some way, they skew the sound in some way, they change the sound in some way, and one of your microphones that is not as good as a really nice neutral one is going to make you sound better than you are, because it tweaks it in a way that happens to appeal to you. Whereas the neutral microphone will just show you what's there. So usually in mic shootouts, the most expensive mic won't win. But I've done lots and lots and lots of microphone shootouts over time on vocals. And the thing that I can tell you is that the cheaper microphones will, from time to time, absolutely crash and burn and be horrible on a singer. The expensive microphone will always be there in the top 2 or 3. And that, in a sense, is a more revealing thing to say about that kind of microphone, is that it depends what you want to use a microphone for, but once you start getting outside that little rather misleading test of the vocal microphone shootout where, you'll see it on YouTube all over the place, they'll get 4 or 5 microphones, they'll sing into one, they go, actually, I like the 57. It's like, okay, but there's a lot more to microphones than that. There's the issue of like, what the off-axis response is like if you're recording something larger than a singer. It's like, particularly what the spill and pickup of acoustic ambience is about. That's a huge deal.
So do you think then for people who have got their own studio at home and they might have spent a long time treating the room and it's a lovely environment and they know what they're doing, do you think then that having a good quality microphone will be more flexible for them, i.e. they could use it for vocals, but they could also record their guitar with it, or they could than necessarily a 57, which, that's typical. People tend to, can use it on vocals and guitar, but actually, does it give them more, that it's more money, but it will give them more versatility in what they can use that microphone for? Is that kind of what you're saying? It's always a good microphone.
With every question about what microphone you're going to get, it's always going to be a question of how many microphones you need, how many different tasks you need to cover with those microphones. And so there's never really an answer properly to the question of, what mic should I get first? How much should I spend on it? Unless you know the extent of what someone's recording requirements are. If they want to record their band in a rehearsal room, then you're going to want more mics to do that. So you're going to have to use cheaper mics. And so probably the concern about whether each individual mic is as high quality within the budget is less of a concern. You're just trying to get the coverage. Whereas if it's just someone and all they're doing is doing dance music and occasionally recording vocals, and they're going to put their whole mic budget on a vocal mic, then yeah, I'd want to get a probably fairly decent vocal mic, especially if they're doing lots of different singers. Because that is, again, like I said before with the mic shootout thing, that's where the expensive microphones really shine, because any singer's going to sound good on them, not just the one who happens to suit that particular microphone.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. One or two really quality mics might be a better investment than a handful of mediocre ones.
Even with like live music, like everybody sings in an SM58, but I'll tell my friends like, hey, I've got a condenser Earthworks handheld mic. Just try it. It's a $600-700 mic. Just try it. And they'll sing through it and they're like, oh my God, I've never heard my own voice like that before. And they're like, this is amazing. And I don't like singing through SM58s anymore. I love singing through that Earthworks handheld mic. It's so beautiful.
It's funny, but this is a very interesting question, because the whole issue of particularly if you start getting a bit more established and you begin to have some budget to spend on microphones, you sometimes find myself getting in this position of thinking, am I spoiling myself if I get microphones that are too expensive? And I'll bring that back to your example, because you talk about this Earthworks mic, and I've just been getting a little bit into live sound stuff because one of my daughters is singing, and it's a tricky one, because you could kind of say, okay, well, if she gets used to singing with a really nice mic, actually, when she walks into most venues, she's going to end up singing to a 58. It's like, well, is it bad training to learn on an Earthworks and then have to use a 58?
No, just have her bring her own mic.
Oh, you reckon?
Bring your own mic. Just bring it and be like, hey, I've got a mic. I don't want to sing through your SM58. I've got my own mic. It needs phantom power, and here you go.
I mean, this has been my question for a lot of the recording courses that you can get at universities and stuff, because a load of them have really, really nice gear, all mics, rooms, the whole thing, and they train a whole bunch of students to get fabulous results in an acoustically treated room with a Steinway grand piano with U67s, and then you hand them a couple of 57s and a guitar amp in someone's rehearsal room, and they're stuffed because they're not used to dealing with mics that are that unforgiving, and those kind of recordings that are unforgiving. It was a really good example of this for me. I did an AES student thing in Moscow, and it had been the actual university facility was very much like a home studio rehearsal room thing. There wasn't really much acoustic treatment. It was a bit kind of shonky, really, but they had like an endorsement with the local Sennheiser distributor, who I swear shipped 50 grand's worth, I think, I would estimate, 50 grand's worth of box fresh Sennheiser and Neumann microphones, top of the range stuff. And the other engineer, the guy I was doing this with, he pretty much just set the mics up by eye. And from my experience in Project Studios, I was like, this is going to be a car crash. I mean, we're going to be moving mics. It's going to be hard work. He just set the mics up by eye, and they all sounded great. And we didn't need to move basically any of them. And I was amazed, because I'm not used to dealing with a huge range of microphones like that. It was my environment, but not my mics. And it was a really big illustration for me as to why, in a sense, sometimes getting people to learn with really good gear doesn't actually teach them to really work hard enough to learn actually how to do decent mic technique.
Yeah, so
I got off topic again.
No. So
this is perfectly on topic.
Yeah.
This is totally relevant.
So are you saying that that's exactly the same setup in that room, but with less good mics, would have sounded terrible? Is that what your takeaway is?
No, it's not that it would have sounded terrible, but I know from experience, having done exactly that kind of session with my kinds of microphones, that I mean, I expect with pretty much 4 out of 5 microphones to have to move it or change it or do something with it, dicker with it, before I get something that's useful out of it. And you're generally doing a lot of running back and forth into the live room, moving stuff around, changing all sorts of stuff to try and get something that sounds any good. But with those top-of-the-range microphones, we pretty much just faded the faders up. And that was it. And in fact, actually, it's in the Multitrack library, that recording. There's a band called Brooks. It's a Russian language song, Как твои воля or something like that. I can't remember what it's exactly called, but you can look it up in the Multitrack library and listen to it. And that was basically a Project Studio recording that was done with a whole bunch of really, really fantastic microphones.
We'll link to it in the description for people to go and check that out and practice with it. That's great.
So how do we equate the using of great microphoning gear where like you don't have to work as hard at it to mixing with great tracks that you don't have to work as hard at it? Mixing when you have such great tracks.
Sorry, repeat the question. I didn't quite get the beginning of that question.
Excuse me. Sorry. So I was trying to compare the two scenario or the two topics that we were listening or talking about, where we've got really good microphones versus cheap microphones, and you said you didn't have to work at it very hard to achieve the sound quality that you wanted. You didn't have to move the mics very much. How does that equate? How can we equate this to mixing, where you've got a nice track of great recorded library to mix from versus really crappy tracks that you have to work hard at? That's what I was trying to.
It's an absolute, but you're making a very good parallel, because it's absolutely the same. The difference between something that's been recorded with a view to the way the mix is going to turn out and something that hasn't been can be the difference between getting 2 or 3 or 4 mixes done in a day and it taking a solid week to do a mix. And I've been in both those situations, so I can speak from first-hand experience there. You know, it's if you record something sensibly and you're thinking with a mix in mind, and if it's not something that's meant to be sounding kind of unnatural and weird, if you're recording a band to pretty much sound like itself and to try and make it sound good, if you record it in the right way, it should pretty much mix itself. And you can do it, but it's just means that it front loads the work. It's better that way, because honestly, it's so much quicker making records that way. I love making records that way, and yet most people don't. Because it's so much quicker and easier and more enjoyable, and everyone has more fun.
Well, that kind of brings me back to the point you were making with your daughter, and her singing into more expensive microphones, and your worry that she's going to walk into a venue and be presented with your standard issue SM58, and did you prep her properly, and is she going to be able to handle that situation? And my opinion is yes, because a good singer, someone who knows their voice, someone who knows how to perform into the microphone, top quality or not, but a top quality microphone is going to give her the feedback that she needs to react, pull herself back from the mic when she's belting it out, and get in closer when it's an intimate passage. And that is playing, that is playing the instrument, right? That's playing your instrument into the microphone. And be presented with a 58, I'm pretty sure that she's going to know exactly what to do and how to handle that situation. So I think that is the right approach, a good approach, maybe not the only approach, but that is a very good approach in know how to utilize top quality equipment. And I think, you'll be able to handle yourself in just about any situation.
Yeah, I also will say that I've played in a couple of festivals and stuff where they've got the mics already set up. You get up there and you sing. And if you have a great mix engineer that can give you what you need to hear in the monitor on the floor wedge, then it's good. You're good to go. You can hear yourself. It is nicer to sing through your own microphone, but in certain situations you don't have that choice. But if you have a good mix engineer that's there and is working with you and is always up there on stage, like, hey, do you need it up? Do you need it down? Do you need more clarity? What do you need? And that works.
I mean, that's one of the fundamental truisms of audio, isn't it?
Right.
You'll only do your best work when you can hear what you're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, and
Absolutely.
as a drummer, when I was younger, the number of times, it sounds ridiculous, but as a drummer, the number of times you can't hear what the rest of the band are playing at times when you're a young band playing live because your drums are loud and nobody's figured out how to actually make it so you can hear what the bass guitarist is playing without pointing a bass guitar speaker at you is, yeah. I'd imagine it's better today with decent monitoring systems and in-ears, but...
No.
Okay.
Actually, and this is hysterical for me because I'm an absolute baby in anything to do with live sound. I mean, I've done lots of live performance, but more in an acoustic situation as a singer and as an instrumental player. But recently, because of just following my daughter around various open mic nights and things, I've taken up bass guitar and have been performing with her on stage, just accompanying her, just so that she's got someone to accompany her a lot of the time, and keys and bass guitar. And so it's my first experience of having to deal with monitoring situations and this kind of stuff. And honestly, it's an absolute... The thing is, and I feel so self-conscious about it because it's like, it's not my field. I really don't know very much about it at all. And yet I so often find myself scratching my head and going, is it just me who can't hear the bass? Is it just me who, does anyone else have a problem with the fact that the sound engineer has clearly not switched on the bass mic and is eating a sandwich? It's like, yeah. So I do a lot of biting my lip. If you can see the scars around my head.
Being able to hear your instrument or your voice live music wise is super important. And even the guys that in this area that do live music and they're solo artists and they have their speaker and they usually have it in front of them or off to the side. And I'm like, can you really hear yourself? And sometimes they'll ask me to come up and sing on a song. And I'm like, you have this all in one system. Really cool. But it's off to the side. You can't hear. I can't hear myself saying, how do you perform night after night? And they're like, it's fine. And they got so used to it like that. And then I said, try some in-ear monitors or try just adding an extra speaker pointed at you just so you can hear yourself. And usually when I say that, and there's a little pushback, like, I like my setup. But then when they try it, they're like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. Now I can hear myself. Now I feel like I could perform anywhere. And it's made my performances that much better. I'm not straining my voice. That's another thing. If you're recording somebody even, or if you're doing live music, it doesn't matter. If you can't hear yourself, you're going to strain your voice. You're going to sing louder, and it's not going to be good. At the end of a 3-hour show, you're going to sound like I sound right now.
Well, and that's going to introduce pitch issues too, because if you can't hear yourself, you can't sing in tune, right? And so that's critical.
Now, you brought up something there, Neil, that I'm quite interested about, actually, is do you feel, I mean, I kind of think there is, but do you feel that there's a substantial difference between miking stuff up live and miking stuff up for recording purposes?
No, I don't think there's that much of a difference in a sense that like where the mic position is matters. I remember I was playing at a church and the sound guy was just racking his head about I don't know how to mic up this kick drum. We tried so many different positions and it just turned out we had to change out the mic. We changed out the mic and we got the punch that we needed. We were able to EQ it because the EQ curve that we were using just looked ridiculous and it wasn't working and it didn't have the punch. It had the thump, but it didn't have the punch and no matter where we moved it. So we changed out the mic and mic placement matters live too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's another interesting question. You just brought it up about EQ. It's just I'm interviewing you now rather than the other way around. Turn the tables. It's just another sidetracking technique. The issue of when I do recording myself, I try, if at all possible, not to use any EQ. And I find that in general, that makes me work harder with my microphone position and mic choice and stuff and gets me better results. And I spoke to one live engineer who was kind of positing the same thing and saying, actually, the best way to get decent results live is to try and not use EQ. And if you have a problem with the sound, change the mic. Is that your
if you
impression
can
too?
Change the mic. If you don't have any extra mics, then you have to work with what you got.
Of course.
All right. Live music, sometimes you got what you got. right? But yeah, you try not, especially the crazy EQ curves like that engineer had. He wasn't that experienced, but the church was like, oh, he knows how to do it, right? So they let him do it. And the EQ curve that he had, like I took it off, but it was still sounding the way it was. It wasn't the right mic choice. So once we changed out the mic and we positioned it correctly, that worked. But yeah, even my live rig, I try not. The only reason that I would have EQ curves is for high pass filters, things like that. Because you want to get rid of some. Because I got some subs, you don't want the rumble and muddiness from that. You want maybe a notch if you know that guitar feedbacks through the mics. It's live music, so if you know that's where the mic usually picks up the guitar and feedbacks, you want to notch that out a little bit. And then sometimes it's just tone shaping on like my bass guitarist. He's got a bass, and sometimes he'll switch it to a different pickup. And when he does, like, there's always just a little annoying frequency at a certain point. So I just notch it down a little bit. Is that
frequency between about 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, I think, isn't
it? Somewhere there.
I've played a few of those, yeah.
Starting out, so as somebody who's beginning this journey of recording, whether it's in the studio or live, I don't think it really matters. There's a lot of tutorials out there, YouTube videos, where a microphone is set up in front of a guitar speaker or a drum set or a vocalist, whatever it is. And they go back to their DAW, they bring up the fader, they check the level. What's the first thing that they end up reaching for? An EQ, right? And they're like, okay, let's mess with this EQ.
Now let's do the work.
Now let's do the work, right? But I think that there's something wrong with that picture, because what maybe we're not seeing, or maybe what we're not being shown, is the microphone placement, and the microphone that's being used is the first EQ that's happening in the recording chain, right? It's not the parametric EQ that you can, surgically split and do all this crazy crap with. It's, where is your microphone relative to the source? What microphone is it? That is your very first EQ curve that you're applying. And if you're not getting the sound that you're hoping for, maybe don't reach for an EQ. Maybe reach for another microphone. Maybe put that microphone somewhere else.
I mean, again, I think the like vocal close miking thing is really responsible for a lot of that problem, because you can get away with that if you've got a dry vocal in front of a microphone. Mm-hmm. What people aren't thinking about is that if they try and put that situation then into a recording session where you've got a whole band in there, you may want to EQ your cymbal mic so that it's got all those frequencies in it and take a bunch of frequencies out or whatever else, not thinking about the fact that it's a whole bunch of sound from all the other instruments coming through that you're then giving this incredibly hilly, weird response to. So all the spill on that microphone is going to sound horrible. So again, this is one of the reasons why I've come back to this thing of using microphones without EQ, because it tends to make the spill from everything else, which is a huge part of any sound when you're recording any kind of ensemble, even if it's an ensemble as small as, a guitarist singing while they're playing guitar, or just a drum kit, which is a kind of an ensemble. The moment you start EQing all the stuff, then all the spill goes out the window as well. It's all the unintended consequences.
Well, we can get really nerdy with, phase relationships within EQ,
with that too.
Right? And that can really, especially with miking up a drum kit. And this is kind of where I wanted to go is Ben, you're a drummer, and and we all know, but as a drummer, the joys and tears of miking up a drum kit and getting a sound out of it. And I know that primarily in your studio you have an electronic drum set, drum set,
yeah.
Right? Yeah,
because it takes away all that headache.
It takes away all, yeah. So there we go. But miking up a drum kit is still standard practice, right?
Yeah,
that is still what we do. And microphone placement is a huge question, right? Because there's tons of techniques. There's sticking every single microphone anywhere there's space, right? Screw the drummer, stick it right there where the drummer sits, and let's capture a great sound.
Or hits, which is
or hits, right?
Quite a common thing. Just put the microphone right where my stick wants to go.
Hopefully, you didn't want to hang on to that microphone, because it's not going to be a microphone after this session.
There are
But,
an
like,
awful lot of chipped SM57s.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's tons of techniques that you could go into recording a drum set. The mono overhead, the Glenn Johns method, Recorder Man, sticking a mid-side configuration or an XY configuration in front of it. There's tons of different options. What has been your guys' experience with something like that? Do you typically find that less is more, or is more a better way to go, because then you can decide what you don't want to include when it comes into the final, mixing phase? Because certainly if you don't set up the microphone, you don't have a track to mix, right? So if you just set up 2 mics, that's all you're going to have. But if you set up 30 mics, well, you've made yourself a nice long weekend of mixing and chopping and editing for yourself. So what's the better
And you've
approach
probably
here?
bored the drummer to death too.
That 20 minutes turned into 2 hours, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions I wanted to really sort of raise with Mike today, is that, I mean, I've been relatively lucky in where I've recorded actual live drums. So yeah, Nate's right here. I don't want a full acoustic kit mic'd up here anymore. They're too loud. It's too hard. So, but I've been relatively lucky and recorded in some really nice studios. And one of the things that always surprised me was how few microphones they tend to use to record kits. Well, I remember the first time I walked into what you'd call a top flight studio, and I think they had four mics to record the kit, and that included a room mic. And I was like, wow, how on earth are you going to record the entire kit? They had like a snare mic, a kick mic, a mic for the rest of the kit, and then a room mic. And I was like, well, this is going to be awful. It sounded incredible. And not only that, it sounded massive. And that was the day that I sort of was like, okay, the bit I didn't know then, obviously, because I was much younger, is that's because these guys know what they're doing. And they have done it before in that room. And
yes, I mean, the in that room bit is the crucial bit. I mean, this, again, people say, oh, well, why should I bother going into a commercial studio? I mean, I've got all that gear myself. I can do it in my own room. Even if the commercial studio doesn't have that much better gear than yours, the difference is that they've been using that room multiple times with lots of different bands, and every single session they've tweaked something and thought, does that sound any better? And you get the cumulative effect of maybe decades of them doing that. And so it may look to you like you walk in and they go, yeah, put the drums there, we'll put the mic there. And it may look like they're not thinking about it, like they're working to some kind of a template. Again, there's lots of misleading stuff you can learn by watching people who do this stuff professionally. And you might think, oh, well, it's all a template. I can just put that template in my studio. It's like, no, it's not a template. That thing is developed over 20 years of them moving things around and trying different stuff. They know it works because they've tried all the other options.
Right.
So it's the kind of inverse. It's the negative space left by all the things that sound not as good.
Yeah, they've learned from everything they've done wrong. That you haven't. It's funny, Nate, myself and Neil have talked about this before when we were all together. The bit that we hate, I think I speak for all of us, on YouTube videos is they show you what they did. They don't show you why they did it. And the reason that they did that is because, as you say, for the past 10 years, they've learned not to put the guitar cab mic there because it sounds terrible. They just go, you put the mic here, and you're like, oh, well, that's where you put it then. And it's like, yeah, right. But you have no context as to why you're putting it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many questions that are usually unanswered. I mean, it's one of my big bugbears, the whole recording templates thing, because so rarely do you even get enough context to decide whether that's a template that you might find useful to follow. You know, it doesn't. It's using different gear than yours, different budget, different genre, different acoustics. Different musician, different instrument, and it's like, well, how actually am I supposed to tell whether this bears any relationship to the gear and equipment and acoustics and people that I've got recording for me? And so it's like, I would rather teach people about kind of general principles of mic technique and then how to apply those to specific situations than try and provide templates. I mean, I've got a lot of flack for it. A lot of people have criticised my mixing and recording books for not providing, a box that says, here's how you record acoustic guitar, or here's how you EQ a triangle. It's impossible for me to do that in good faith because of that problem. And yet, unfortunately, it's such an easy myth to sell that probably when they do the video of like, here's how you create massive drums with 3 mics, they're going to get many more clicks and much more interaction than they will for the one where they say, well, actually, it all depends.
Yeah.
It's the kind of
right.
the boring true
exciting.
answer is not gonna get you. So unfortunately, that generates this kind of mushroom effect on YouTube of these kinds of things popping up everywhere, and yeah, unfortunately, being misleading. Some of the very worst recordings I've ever had to mix have been a result of people following miking templates. Just really horrible, awful things, and just not even thinking why they're doing it or listening to what the outcome is and just assuming, oh, well, if I put the mics in those positions, that's the professional way of doing it. It's like, no, it's actually got to sound any good.
Yeah.
That's
I
the
put
same
them
thing with
there.
like recording an acoustic guitar. Like here, just put it at the near the 12th fret, facing the sound hole. And it's like, okay, I've tried that. Oh, that's too boomy. With it this distance from the mic, but you also got to take into consideration the guitar you're working with, the room you're in, the mic you're using, and the person who's playing. Is he moving while he's playing acoustic guitar? Because that'll mess up your whole recording right there. So yeah, the template part, I completely agree with you. It's like, hey, here's some techniques that you could use. Try them.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, the video you very rarely see is the one that will be really helpful, which is the video that says, okay, you've looked at some template or you've got some vague idea. In fact, it's what we all do as recording engineers when we plan a session. We don't go into a session and build everything from scratch. You just don't have time. It was the same live, of course. But it's like you plan it out in your head in advance and you go, well, this is my experience. This is where I think it's probably going to sound good. And you basically estimate the whole thing, guess the whole thing to start with, educated guesswork, so that you don't have to then build everything from first principles. But then when you get in there, the really important thing is not the guess that you took. The important thing is how you reacted to how it sounded then and what you did with it. So whenever I'm writing about like recording things or miking things, I'm always trying to write about the bit after that first mic choice. It's like, yes, I put a 57 on the snare, but then when I heard it, it sounded like this. And so that made me think, okay, well, I suspect there's too much proximity effect on it, or this is the wrong mic, or he's hitting it in a different place, or I need to get more undersnare on it, I need to add another microphone in. It's that thought process that is the recording thing, not which mic you put up. And the thing is that actually in project studios, particularly where the mics are so unforgiving and the acoustics are so weird and all this kind of stuff, if you work from first principles, you'll often find yourself doing recording setups that you won't read about anywhere, but have come up organically by the nature of the situation you're in. Like, just off the top of my head, an example with drums. I remember one of the best drum sounds I've ever got was where I was recording in a really small, like, project studio thing where the room was over-deadened, and also we were just trying to make it a really dry kind of funky sound, so we were just padding everything. And when I put the overheads up, they sounded really thin and not very impressive, because of course most of a drum sound overheads is reflections.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, okay, if they're working from first principles, it means that I'm not getting as much of the sound of the kit coming through my overheads as I would normally, because I'm not getting the reflections. So I'll put up a second pair of overheads to pick up another set of reflections and combine those together. Now, I challenge you to say you've ever seen a YouTube video that says put up 2 sets of overheads, but it sounded brilliant, but it was just because of that specific scenario where I was just listening to it and going, well, this sounds thin. It clearly needs more frequency information. Let's put up some more microphones.
So in that setup, you had a set of overheads, probably placed pretty standard, right? So then your second set of overheads, were they further back? Were they higher up?
Well, I mean, normally when I do overheads, if I'm doing drums, to work quickly, I don't usually have microphones in the traditional overheads placement.
Okay.
I usually have them round about the drummer's shoulders, because the quickest way to record drums, the kind of cheat way of doing it, is to try and get the stereo pickup that sounds pretty much like the full drum kit. And you can't do that over the cymbals. You'll get something that's all cymbals and dull drum ambience. Whereas if you stick it by the drummer's shoulders, you'll get pretty much what the drummer hears, that's what they're balancing, and you'll get a decent blend of cymbals and drum ambience. And then it takes all the stress off all your close mics, because you're not trying to get the whole snare sound out of a close mic. You can just use the close mic to bring it a bit forward in the mix and give it a bit extra punch or whatever it is you need. And so in that situation, I had that kind of overhead microphone setup, I seem to remember. And then I thought, well, I'm coming to get it from the drummer's side. I'm not getting any reflections from the other side of the kit. I'll put the other overheads on the other side of the kit. And I think I don't know, put a crosspair or something out the front of the kit, pointing back towards the drummer. Again, this is most of the sessions that I do, well, not most of them, but a lot of the sessions that I do, you can read about. So it's actually, there's a session notes column about it that I did for the magazine that has, you can listen to the orchestra. In fact, you can even listen, you can get the multitracks, never listen.
Wow. I mean, that's, I think that's the bit that you get, you touched on earlier about why you should still, why a studio is still relevant, right? Why are recording studio if everyone can record at home? For me, having played in recording studios, there are three things that always stick in my mind. How fast they work, and that is because of experience, to be fair. But they go in, they go, put your drums over there, they put mics up, they go in, you track 5 tracks in a day, it sounds amazing, you go home. If you were doing that at home, you're doing 1 track in a day because you've spent 5 hours getting your mic placement and getting it to sound good. And yes, then you can track the rest. But studios work incredibly fast. Because everything's patched in, everything's ready. You just go, I want the DBX 160 on the, fine, it's all ready to go. And the other thing is that they have the gained knowledge to do exactly that. My overheads sound thin. I'm going to try putting one over here. And they will know very quickly whether that's fixed the problem or that's not made the problem any better. So it's not... probably because they've got a separate control room, but they're not having to record some stuff, listen to it, move something, record some stuff, listen to it. They just go into a control room and say to the drummer, hit stuff, and then they go, no, that's no better, or it's better, or whatever. So it came up the other week when we were speaking with Warren about, Warren Hewitt, when we were talking about recording studios. There's less of them now, and that sort of thing. But they are still, why do big artists go to recording studios? It's not because they're big artists and they go, oh, I'm only recording at Abbey Road. It's because they go, I'm going to Abbey Road because they know what they're doing. They've got great mics. The room will sound good and it will be really quick, and we'll go in and we'll record it all and we'll be out. And
because they've had the experience of recording drum sets there for years. Exactly. Whereas in your bedroom, you've only recorded it once, right?
Yeah.
Or a couple of times. So you've not gotten the mic placements before, the knowledge of what sounds good in your bedroom. So that's why studios are absolutely relevant. And
actually, this is something I can pick up from something you said before. I think it was Nate. You were talking about, are microphones still relevant now that we can do so much digitally? And I was thinking in a kind of philosophical frame of mind, thinking, well, is production at all relevant if you can get some AI engine just to create the sound? Which we have to acknowledge is going to happen. It's happening to graphic artists, it's happening to videographers. It's going to happen to us that AI is going to replace what we do. But it's not going to replace what we do in the same way that MP3 has never fully replaced vinyl. Because the issue that all this stuff all this AI stuff isn't factoring in is the fact that there's a human element to this. And that the reason I think why recording studios are going to remain in existence is because music is a human endeavor that humans enjoy doing. And so the humans who do it are going to want to have fun doing it. And the best way to have fun in making a record is to get everyone together in a room and record them quickly with people who know what they're doing and who are fun to be around, which happens to be called a recording studio. So irrespective of whether you need to do it, irrespective of whether you can get a result out at the end that sounds identical, any musician in any band you speak to is going to want to go into a studio just because it's so much more fun to do it that way, if they actually care about the music. There will always be people who don't and will happily get the AI to do it and just do the marketing and the being the personality. But actually, people do music because they love music. And there are always going to be enough people who love music that I think they're always going to want to go into studios because it's just such an enjoyable way to make music without having to think about any technicalities and stuff.
Yeah, I think in the future, AI is going to be a tool. It's going to be something that we use maybe to get an idea. Like I've got an 11 rack here, and it's not AI. I'm just saying, but it's it's not. I just plug it in and I get some guitar tones, right? It's a great tool. It actually sounds really good. I have used it on records, but or recordings. But there's something to just micing something up and then just the human element. Like
we're
what
in
you
the
said,
we're
that-
in the as I mean, if you think of it as people who work in the music industry, we are in the industry of providing experiences, and AI can't provide people experiences. They can just provide a product, a thing. So as long as people want experiences, they're always going to come to real places and real people. Live music is going to continue to be a thing, even if people can go see AI. I mean, even if they can go see the avatars in this kind of AI ABBA things, actually they're still going to go see ABBA cover bands probably too. Or they're probably going to still go see bands in real life because they want something genuine and something that's kind of an enjoyable experience, not just the outcome.
Well, like you said earlier, Mike, you know, the reason why microphones are still relevant is because you're capturing something that's moving the air. And a digital signal doesn't move the air, right? And so there's a difference right there. And put that in the context of recording studios and being in the same room with people. You're in a room where air is moving and energy is bouncing off the walls, whether that be sound energy or somebody's, you know, smile when they hear their voice coming through a top quality microphone. That energy transfers into other people. That transfers into the band. That transfers into the recording engineer that's sitting behind the glass. And all of that collective energy then translates into the audio that's being recorded. And you don't get that when you're sitting by yourself in your project studio. And not saying that you shouldn't sit by yourself in your project studio, because how else would demos ever start, right? They're, you know, in your bedroom, in your basement. But having that experience with other people in the same room, with gear, moving air, that's not ever going to be replaceable by AI or by algorithms or by DSP processing. That's my take. It might be an unpopular opinion, but you know, there's nothing that beats. Just, you know, after COVID, and we got done with Zooms, and here we are on a Zoom meeting. But after, you know, getting done with Zooms, being in the same room with my friends that I watched on a screen for 2 years was amazing, right? And so that experience is something that will never go away.
Yeah, art is a human experience.
It is a human experience.
Absolutely.
Wow. We got way off
We got
topic. We got real deep.
My work here is done.
That is good. There's man, I don't know. I don't have anything else because, like, yeah. I don't know. What do you guys got? I don't have anything else.
I think there's many things that, I mean, just my final take on the AI thing is, you mentioned you've got a microphone that emulates other microphones.
Yeah. And I love it. It was well worth the investment, because I'm not going to be able to get an RCA 44 ribbon mic. You know.
Really?
Just
I thought that was Christmas this year, Nate.
well, if you're sending one.
I couldn't ship it to America. It's too expensive.
But see, that's a tool. That's a tool that you're using that maybe you couldn't afford something. Another thing that's coming out with AI is AI-driven light shows. Maestro DMX or something like that is a new product that came out that I'm thinking about buying, because, like, I don't have a light guy. My lights are controlled by a foot pedal. I have a foot pedal and I control it via MIDI. Here, it's like, well, you've got AI that will listen to the live performance that you're playing and will just blink the lights and make the light show based on the music that is playing. That sounds very interesting to somebody like me who we have a 3-piece with no light guy. But that'll never replace. Like, we were talking with Lee Turner about, they've got a light guy out there, and it's not all like pre-programmed or anything. He's there pressing the buttons. He's there. He knows what lights he wants to play, when he wants to play, even though they're playing to a click. And that human element, you will never replace that. But for people that like you won't own that expensive ribbon microphone. So a little emulator, not a problem. right? It's a tool. We're using it as a tool, not something to replace a human.
I can recommend cheap ribbon microphones, though.
And the
great thing about ribbon microphones is they're so simple. I mean, it's a big whacking great magnet and a ribbon, and there's not much to go wrong with it. So a lot of cheap ribbon mics actually sound quite good.
They do. And I have a few. One of my favorites, actually, it's up here, is a Royer 101 ribbon mic.
No, I mean, but that's an expensive ribbon mic as far as I'm concerned.
I bought it used, so it was inexpensive.
Oh, well, there you go.
So there we go.
It's a bargain ribbon mic.
But I think that's the thing. The thing I've loved about this conversation is, so I've been a drummer for years, but I've been a mastering engineer for just over a decade, and that's sort of what I do now. I play a lot less drums, hence it's just electronic here in my house, but I do mainly mastering. And the bit that has become apparent, the more we speak to people like yourself or Warren Hewitt or Ian Shepherd or anything like that, is you're all thinking about the step before and the step after, no matter what you're doing. So if you're mixing or if you're recording, you're thinking of how is this going to sit when I get to mix it. So when you're miking a guitar stack, you're not just plugging it in and going, well, that sounds good. You're going, well, it does sound good, but that's not going to fit in the mix with everything else that's going on. And when you're mastering and when you're mixing, Neil's always said, and Nate, if you mix with the master in mind, then and I think that's the bit that is becoming more and more apparent to me. The more people we talk to on this podcast, you have to think of the project as a whole and what you're trying to create as an entity. And that influences how you record it, how you mix it. And then when you send it to a mastering engineer, he should be able to, and I say he, she, they, apologies, should be able to hear the mix and understand the vision for that song. And that's the bit that we touched on it with Ian Shepherd about AI mastering, the Landers and that. They do a very good job and they are very, very useful in some circumstances, but they don't understand, because they're not human, the emotional feeling that was supposed to be for that album or that single. And that's the bit that I think is the same you're talking about, when we're talking about microphones. It might not be there's anything wrong with the EQ curve for that 57 on that vocal, but with your ears, that's not right.
Yeah. And actually what you're talking about, I mean, in a sense, some people could call that like a vision for the project. People often talk about, you if you're going to mix something, if you're going to record something, the only way you can really decide what is the right sound is if you have a vision for what it needs to be. And that's really what it is. You put your finger on it. It's about having that sense of what you're doing being within the context of all the other stages of the project that you're working on. And that's the very reason why I think recording engineers will never go out of business, because you can have all the gear in the world, you can have all the, you can, whatever the digital stuff can do, whatever you can buy in your home studio, if you don't have the experience of doing a bunch of projects, you can't have that vision. It's that's where it comes from. It comes from having done a bunch of stuff wrong and then go, well, I want to do that again. And knowing what makes something work and what doesn't, and having that overview. So, yeah, all the gear and no idea, people are always going to need recording engineers.
So once again, we come back to putting in the 10,000 hours, right? It comes down to putting in the work.
It's a common thing.
Learning what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems to be the answer to a lot of things, is like, how do I ... Well, just, do it over and over and over again.
Experience.
Yeah.
Well, there's no easy way to any place worth going.
No, and that is another thing that I don't like about YouTube videos, is there's no shortcuts. There's no secret that we're missing out on. Sorry, Mike, I know that you're not missing secrets and secrets.
I've copped flack for that too. People have said, well, what do you mean secrets? It's like, I knew about this already, or, it's like, oh, give me a bit of artistic license.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's no shortcuts here. There's no like five tips that you've never heard of that are going to magically make your recording or mix better. It's repetition. It's knowing your equipment, knowing your room, knowing, the thing you're about to record, knowing your performance, right? You don't just get in front of a microphone and be like, well, here goes nothing. You know what you're going to play, and you're going to play it well. That's gonna evoke a good performance through a microphone, recorded into your DAW or on tape if you so happen to choose. So it's all about knowing what you're about to do, knowing your room, knowing your equipment, and doing it again and again.
Yeah,
it's fun. It is funny, isn't it? How we spoke to Leanne, Lee, Warren, Mike, Joe. Yeah. Doesn't matter who you speak to. They go, well, how did you get to where you are? Because I did it a lot, and I did it over and over again, and I got good at it because I did it a lot. I mean, that's everybody's answer.
That is the answer.
And if you want a great place to practice mixing, you can go to cambridgemt.com and get some great multitracks, right?
Yeah,
practice
indeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Practice away.
Look at that smooth segue. You see,
nice.
I can tell you've been podcasting
Neil.
for a while.
Neil, you're happening. See, it's repetition. You're doing it episode after episode. There we go.
Yeah. This is what, episode 7, right?
Yeah, episode
we'll
7.
figure it out. At some
We pressed
point.
record at the right points, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hate listening to myself on episode 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm like, hey, friends, if you're going to listen to me, start with episode 2.
Well, I think that we have touched upon everything we wanted to, and there's not much more that I really, want to find out at this point. I want to get to work now, recording some stuff. Mike, this has been a great conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I think I've interviewed you more than you've interviewed me, to be honest.
That's perfect. That's
brilliant.
great, though. That's excellent. Yeah, no, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and expertise.
You're more than welcome.
Obviously we stated your websites, cambridge-mt.com. They can find you on Sound on Sound magazine with the mix review and whatnot, and you're on Patreon. I encourage everyone to go and check these resources out if you have not already. Mike, is there anything you want to say to close us out?
No, I mean, the main thing is if you want to support the stuff I'm doing, because I do a lot of educational stuff, then the Patreon thing is the best place to go. And I also do a lot of my kind of video and podcast development there. So there's like 100-odd videos, 100-odd podcasts there, like mixing tutorial podcasts. So, if you want to get the stuff that I'm doing, kind of the best stuff that I'm doing, then the best way to do that is to support the Cambridge MT site. Enable me to keep hosting these multi-tracks and keep providing things like the microphone position library and things like that. That's great.
Amazing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And this was a great conversation. I'm sure we'll hear more from Mike Sr. in future episodes. But for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys again next month. Thank you for listening to Sound Discussion. Your hosts are Ben Holmes, Neil Merchant, and me, Nate Kelms. Our theme song is composed and recorded by Jojo Timmerman. You can find us on the internet at sounddiscussionpodcast.com, or you can drop us a line at sounddiscussionpodcast@gmail.com. Additional show notes for this episode can be found on our website or in the description area of your podcast player. A big thank you to our guest for taking the time to chat with us today, and to you, the listener, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of our discussion. We look forward to having you join us again next month on another episode of Sound Discussion.
Does anyone else have a problem with the fact that the sound engineer has clearly not switched on the bass mic and is eating a sandwich?